They were sitting in a hospital room, surrounded by family members who were saying goodbye to Claire, a woman who had always been an example of dignity and strength to them. But no one in the room even suspected who the man was who was gently holding her hand. For 7 years, she kept this secret from the world, trying to protect what mattered most to her. It was only after her last breath that the truth came out, changing everything her family believed in. Enjoy the story. The hospital room was dimly lit by the gentle glow of a bedside lamp, casting soft shadows across the weary faces of those gathered in quiet vigil. Outside, the city's ceaseless hum was muted by the heavy curtains, leaving only the steady heartbeat of the monitors and the choked breaths of mourners to fill the space. Claire, a graceful white woman from a traditional family, lay motionless on the bed, her once vibrant eyes now closed forever in peaceful slumber. The atmosphere was thick with grief and unspoken regrets, a tangible tension that pressed against every heart in the room. Among the faces in the circle of family and close friends, there was one figure whose presence caused an unexpected ripple of shock and suspicion. Seated at the edge of the gathering, almost blending into the subdued background, was a man whose dark, soulful eyes and gentle demeanor did not immediately match the pale forms of Claire's kin. He sat quietly by her bedside, his hand tenderly covering hers in a touch that was at once both protective and intimate. His presence was inexplicable to those who knew Claire's life only as it had been professed by her family. A life steeped in tradition, where the idea of love crossing racial lines was often met with unyielding judgment. His mere appearance, and the evident closeness with which he held her hand, sent a current of whispered questions and bitter glances rippling through the room. At first, the relatives exchanged uneasy looks, their eyes narrowing in disbelief. Hushed murmurs began as incredulous whispers. Who is that, and what does he know of her? Each question was loaded with an undercurrent of disapproval and the old prejudices that had long ruled their family gatherings. Some recalled with rising irritation that Claire had always guarded a secret, a forbidden closeness that she shielded from prying eyes. And now that secret was embodied in the quiet, determined man who seemed to exude both love and sorrow. His skin, rich and dark, a stark contrast to the pale lineage of those present, served as an unwilling symbol of all that the family had feared, the unknown that threatened to upend long-held notions of propriety and tradition. The man who would later be revealed as Michael had been a constant presence in Claire's life for nearly 7 years, yet to her family he had remained an invisible spectre. He was the one whose gentle smile and compassionate eyes held the power to soothe her lonely moments, confidant who had shared her deepest hopes and her darkest fears. But in this final hour, as Claire lay silent and still, Michael was thrust unwillingly into the spotlight, a spotlight that illuminated his love for her in the only way he could express it, by holding her hand as if to say goodbye, to promise that her secret would not be forgotten, even as the world prepared to judge it. In those first agonizing moments around the deathbed, every second stretched taut with the weight of unspoken truths and buried passions. Tears welled in the eyes of some relatives as they grappled with a sense of betrayal, a betrayal not of actions they could directly accuse, but of a life lived in half-truths and silent sacrifices. Yet, amid the murmurs of discontent and the heavy scent of antiseptic and mortality, Michael's presence was an enigma. His gentle grasp, his calm resolve, and the quiet dignity he exhibited seemed to hold a promise of a story far beyond the pale confines of prejudice and fear. Even as harsh whispers began to circulate and furrowed brows betrayed their shock and disapproval, a strange, another kind of beauty shimmered in that sorrowful moment, a beauty born of love, of defiance in the face of tradition, and of the tender hope that sometimes the heart's truth is worth every sacrifice. In the quiet aftermath of the hushed goodbyes by Claire's deathbed, as the room's heavy silence was punctuated by soft sniffles and the faint hum of machines, a different kind of sound began to echo, a sound carried by memories and whispers of a long-concealed past. The initial shock of seeing the unknown man tenderly holding Claire's hand had set off ripples of disquiet among her relatives. Their eyes, once brimming with sorrow and disbelief, now turned inward as silent questions emerged like fragile murmurings. Who was this man? What secret did his gentle presence at her side unveil? In that suspended moment, as the cool hospital air mingled with the bittersweet sorrow of an ending, the room itself seemed to lean toward a story that had been hidden behind layers of tradition and fear. It was in the secret chronicles of her life, a life written quietly against the backdrop of expected propriety, that the true story of Claire and Michael slowly began to surface. Many years ago, under a summer sky dusted with the warm hues of hope and possibility, Claire had encountered Michael at a community festival. His stride was confident, and his smile, marked by tenderness and genuine warmth, was enough to challenge every preconception she had inherited from her traditional upbringing. In a world where conformity was embraced with fervor, Michael's presence was like a striking, unexpected splash of color. His voice, deep and caring, had drawn her away from the sterile corridors of social expectations into a realm where her heart could speak freely, a language that only Michael seemed fluent in. As their lives began to intertwine, every shared moment became a secret symphony composed in hushed tones and quiet glances. Late-night walks beneath starlit skies and secret picnics in secluded parks quickly evolved into the foundation of an extraordinary love. Michael, with his gentle humor and steadfast support, embodied all the qualities that Claire had yearned for, though she knew that such a connection could never receive the blessing of her conservative family. Their romance, built on mutual respect and the unspoken promise of an unwavering bond, flourished in the delicate spaces between daylight and darkness. Yet from the very outset, there was an undercurrent of dread, a deep-seated fear that the revelation of their love, a union that defied the rigid racial and cultural lines drawn by her family's long-held beliefs, would shatter the carefully constructed facade of her life. In a series of heart-wrenching decisions made in the name of self-preservation, Claire had chosen to hide Michael from her family. Every tender smile they exchanged, every whispered secret under cover of night, was veiled from those whose judgments were swift and unforgiving. She had lived in two parallel worlds, one where she played the dutiful daughter, upholding the ideals and expectations of her lineage, and another where she embraced a love so powerful it eclipsed the boundaries of convention. The chasm between these lives was filled with bittersweet sacrifices, a litany of silent tears, the stolen joy of clandestine meetings, and the perpetual fear of being unmasked, to those who would scorn her for daring to love against all odds. Even as she clung to the hope for a future where love would triumph over tradition, every moment in Michael's embrace was weighed down by the haunting possibility of exposure. The dread of being rejected by her family, ostracized for her choices, castigated for daring to defy an unyielding cultural norm, became the invisible chain that bound her. In her private journals, penned in cursive that trembled with both passion and desperation, she chronicled the bittersweet secret of their romance. There were entries that spoke of quiet moments of bliss, of laughter under the moonlight, and of dreams shared in whispers. Yet interlaced with these were expressions of sorrow and regret, a constant, pulsating reminder that living a divided life exacted a heavy toll. As the memories unfurled like tender petals in the minds of those present, it became clear that Michael was not merely the unknown stranger at her bedside. He was the silent keeper of a love story that had been hidden away for fear of familial rejection, a story that Claire had guarded with every beat of her heart. His steady hand on hers in those final moments was both a comforting caress and a quiet proclamation. It spoke of endless nights spent dreaming of a world where differences were celebrated rather than condemned, and where the heart's truth transcended the fearful chains of convention. Now, as the remnants of Claire's secret life began to resurface, the air in the hospital room grew thick with an impending reckoning. The revelation of this concealed past, of a love that had blossomed in the shadows, despite the threat of repudiation, was poised to challenge everything the family had believed about her. It was clear that the tenderness emanating from Michael's presence, though uninvited and initially met with whispers of disapproval, held within it the power to shatter long-held prejudices. The deep, resonant echo of their shared moments, was about to upend a legacy built on narrow traditions, inviting every heart present to reconsider what it meant to cherish true love. In the sterile quiet of the hospital chapel, a few days after Claire's passing, her traditional family gathered amid a blend of grief and unresolved tension. The air was heavy with memories, a potent mixture of sorrow, regret, and unspoken judgment. The family assembled in the sparsely decorated room, their faces etched with uncertainty as they prepared to hear the final words of the woman who for so long had guarded her most profound secret. A somber hush fell over the room when the family's attorney, Mr. Reynolds, stepped forward with a thick leather-bound folder. Today he was not merely reading legal directives, he was about to reveal a truth that would shatter the narrow confines of their long-standing prejudices. Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat and began, his voice measured yet carrying an undercurrent of emotion. In accordance with the last will and testament of our dear Claire, I now present you with her final wish. His eyes moved slowly over the gathered faces before sliding his hand along the stack of documents. With a deep, calculated pause, he unsealed an envelope marked with Claire's delicate handwriting. The envelope was yellowed by time and touched by gentle care, almost as if each crease were imbued with the reverence of secret memories. As Mr. Reynolds unfolded the letter, a palpable tension wove itself into the silence of the room. The letter, addressed to those who had assumed they knew her entirely, began with tender confessions of love and regret. In her elegant script, Claire wrote, "To my beloved family, you believed you knew the truth of my life. But know this, love, in its purest form, does not abide by boundaries of race, tradition, or expectation. I chose love over fear, and in that choice I found both joy and sorrow." Her words revealed a secret marriage, a union that defied the constraints imposed upon her by her upbringing. As the attorney read on, the letter unfolded the years of hidden bliss and quiet suffering. Claire recounted the serendipitous day she met Michael at a community festival, describing how his compassionate smile and unwavering support lured her heart away from expectations and into forbidden love. She detailed how, despite knowing the price of defiance, she allowed herself to embrace every precious moment with him, a life filled with secret rendezvous, whispered promises in moonlit parks, and the bittersweet pain of concealing their true bond from a family that prized tradition above tenderness. With every carefully chosen word, the room's atmosphere shifted. Shock rippled through the assembly as long-suppressed truths burst forth in the soft cadence of Claire's confession. Some relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others exchanged glances filled with a cocktail of disbelief, anger, and deep sorrow. "She never would have done this," one voice murmured harshly, tinged with disapproval. Yet in the midst of the discontent, there were hints of understanding glowing in the eyes of a few, those who had perhaps doubted their assumptions, or who had silently mourned a version of Claire they never truly knew. The letter continued with Claire's passionate declaration, "I have hidden my love for Michael out of fear of your scorn, of losing the bonds I cherished, yet every moment with him reminded me of who I truly was. I firmly believe that real family is not determined by blood or tradition, but by the courage to love without boundaries. I beg you to forgive me for the secrets I was forced to keep, and I hope that in time you too will come to understand that love is the only legacy worth cherishing." Tears glistened on paper as if the ink had been mixed with her own tears, each sentence a soft but pointed repudiation of the narrow-mindedness that had long governed their interactions. As Mr. Reynolds reached the end of the letter, an anguished silence occupied the space. The family, previously united by the facade of shared heritage, now found themselves divided by the raw emotion of the unveiled truth. Some erupted in angry protests, voices trembling with indignation, as if the very idea of their beloved Claire's choices was an affront to everything they believed in. Others, however, sat in stunned silence, their expressions softening into pained introspection as the magnitude of her confession seeped into their consciousness. Before the murmurs could swell into an uncontrollable outcry, a soft knock at the door drew every eye. Michael, now fully revealed, entered the room carrying a time-worn wooden box. With quiet dignity, he offered the box to Mr. Reynolds, who gently opened it before the family's eyes. Within lay a collection of faded photographs, letters and keepsakes, chronicling the secret chapters of Claire and Michael's life together, a candid snapshot of their impromptu wedding in a hidden chapel, laughter captured during a spontaneous road trip, and handwritten notes brimming with the everyday tenderness of their cohabitation. Each piece of memorabilia was a tangible reminder that despite the societal constraints that sought to silence their love, their bond had been real, full of passion, sacrifice, and unyielding commitment. The room's emotional temperature soared as the weight of these revelations sank in. The confrontation was not merely with the contents of a will, but with the deep-seated prejudices that had, until now, governed their sense of identity and belonging. The family now stood at the crossroads of resentment and reconciliation, a moment pregnant with the possibility for transformation. As the photographs and letters were passed around, long-held misconceptions and hurtful judgments began to crumble under the raw, undeniable evidence of genuine love. In the wake of the shocking revelations from Claire's will, the air in the old family living room grew electric with conflicting emotions. The documents and photographs, now spread out on the coffee table, were silent yet powerful witnesses to a love story the relatives had never known. Their tapestry of secret weddings, stolen adventures, and everyday moments that gleamed with tender intimacy. Faces that moments before had been contorted in anger or disbelief now softened as memories, long buried beneath prejudice, began to ripple through their hearts. The revelations forced each person present to confront a truth that shattered their carefully constructed reality. Claire's life was not a tale of filial duty to tradition, but one of passionate defiance of fear. As voices rose and fell in a tumult of tears, angry murmurs, and hesitant whispers of understanding, a determined figure emerged from the periphery. Michael, once the unknown stranger at Claire's bedside, now unmistakably revealed as the man who had loved her with a steadfast heart, stepped forward. The room stilled further as he gently asked for silence, his deep, soulful voice resonating with both sorrow and hope. He carried in his arms a small, time-worn box, its worn wood a silent echo of memories and moments carefully preserved over the 7 years they had shared in secret. With measured calm, Michael opened the box before the assembled family. Inside lay a collection of personal mementos, faded photographs, capturing joyous smiles between him and Claire, small letters penned in delicate script, and cherished tokens collected during their clandestine outings. One by one, he carefully passed these items among the family members. Each photograph revealed Claire in her element, a radiant smile during a spontaneous picnic, her eyes alight with wonder on a moonlit stroll, and candid moments that showed her vibrant spirit, far removed from the shy, reserved persona upheld by societal expectations. As the relatives sifted through these tangible memories, the hardened lines of prejudice began to soften. What had once been perceived as betrayal started to evoke a bittersweet understanding of true, unbridled human love. Yet Michael's most stirring act was still to come. After the room absorbed the weight of their shared past, he pulled from the same box a folded envelope, each of identical design, addressed individually to every family member present. With a quiet but clear instruction, he announced, "Before I leave, I ask you all to read these letters. They were written by Claire herself. In them she pleads for you to let go of your judgments, to see the truth in the love that shaped her final days." As one by one the letters were unfolded, the words leapt from the paper like heartfelt confessions, lines that spoke of a love so true it defied tradition, of a life chosen despite the fear of rejection, and of an earnest desire for unity that took root in her heart amid despair. The raw emotion in her words carried through the room, piercing through years of silence. A few relatives' eyes brimmed with tears, their hardened exteriors dissolving into regretful remorse and tentative hope. The most dramatic moment arrived when Michael gently rose and invited the family to follow him out into the garden, the one sanctuary Claire had always treasured. Under a twilight sky lit by the soft glow of aging lampposts and the gentle chirping of crickets, the family gathered near the ancient oak at the garden's center, Its sturdy branches, heavy with the weight of countless seasons, bore silent testimony to the cycles of life, loss and renewal. Michael knelt slowly beside a small patch of earth, unearthing a modest sapling from a nearby planter. Carefully he cradled it in his weathered hands, and with a voice thick with emotion, announced, "In memory of Claire, and as a symbol of the new beginning she would have wanted for all of us, I will plant this tree. Let it be a living reminder that love grows where we nurture it, and that forgiveness can transform even the deepest wounds." As he pressed the sapling into the soft soil, those gathered felt a palpable shift within their midst. The act was elegant in its simplicity, a single tree, fragile yet determined, rising from the earth as a beacon of enduring hope. One by one, hesitant hands reached out to touch its tender leaves, as if absorbing the silent promise of rebirth. In that sacred moment, the long-held chains of prejudice began to crumble. Anger softened into reflective introspection, whispered criticisms were replaced by murmurs of pity and understanding, and in place of rancor, a tentative unity blossomed, a shared resolve to honor Claire's memory, not with judgment but with love. Tears flowed freely now, as the family embraced one another in a collective catharsis. There were apologies in hushed tones, promises to change, and the overwhelming realization that the true legacy Claire left behind was not one of defiance against tradition, but of embracing love in its raw, unfiltered form. Michael's final gesture, imparting Claire's own words and planting the sapling as a living testament to courage, had begun to mend what years of silent resentment might have irrevocably torn apart. As the family slowly retraced their steps back into the old house, enveloped by a newfound resolve, they carried with them the indelible lesson that love, in its most genuine form, always transcends boundaries. The seeds of understanding had just been sown, a promise that the prejudice of old could be replaced with the light of acceptance and the vibrant bloom of reconciled hearts. After the poignant scene in the garden, when Michael planted the sapling beneath the old oak, a symbol of new beginnings and healing, he gathered the family together in the cozy sitting room of the ancestral home. Despite the lingering shock and indignation that had once roiled the room, an atmosphere of tentative acceptance now began to settle. It was time for the final act, Michael's most personal farewell gift, one that Claire had meticulously prepared before her passing. Michael quietly retrieved the familiar, time-worn box from which he had earlier shared photographs and keepsakes. The box, its wooden surface etched with delicate carvings, reminiscent of Claire's graceful handwriting, now seemed to pulse with the weight of unspoken truth and boundless love. One by one, Michael opened a series of neatly folded envelopes, each envelope individually marked with the name of a family member. These letters, penned by Claire herself, were meant to reach into the very hearts of those who had once clung to narrow definitions of duty and tradition. With a gentle, measured voice, Michael announced, "These are Claire's final messages to each of you. She wrote them with the hope that you would understand her choices, see beyond the prejudices that have long divided us, and accept that the truest form of family is built on love and compassion rather than on appearances or ingrained bias." His tone, laced with both sorrow and resolute determination, fell over the room like a soft benediction. One by one, relatives timidly opened their individual envelopes. Almost instantly, silence descended as each person began to read aloud, or in thoughtful quiet. The words that flowed from the paper were intimate and unflinching, a mosaic of Claire's secret dreams, her private heartaches, and her unwavering conviction that love was a force capable of dissolving even the most entrenched barriers. I loved Michael with all that I was, for his gentle soul illuminated my hidden corners. One letter began, the ink trembling slightly like fragile tears on the page. I chose him over fear, and in that choice I discovered the freedom to be true to my heart. Another passage declared, its cadence both lyrical and sorrowful. As the readings continued, emotions surged like a tidal wave through the room. Some family members gasped as they discovered passages recounting the tender moments of Claire's clandestine wedding, a small, intimate ceremony held in a secret chapel. The quiet, joyous afternoons spent laughing over shared dreams, and the whispered promises made under starlit skies. Each recollection was interwoven with the painful reality of her dual life, how the life she led in private was so dramatically different from the life that her family had assumed she inhabited. Anger and disbelief intermingled with remorse as the true depth of her sacrifice unfurled before them. For some, the shock was overwhelming. For others, the words were a bittersweet revelation that shattered the long-held walls of prejudice that they had built around their hearts. Tears glistened on many faces. One elderly cousin, who had always prided himself on upholding the family's strict honor code, trembled as he read a passage where Claire wrote, "Let not the chains of tradition bind you so tightly as to blind you from the radiance of truth. I ask you, my dear ones, to embrace love without fear. For in every heartbeat of forgiveness lies the promise of a better tomorrow." The old man's eyes soon welled up with remorse as he realized that his steadfast adherence to rigid customs had kept him from truly understanding the essence of familial love. At that moment, the atmosphere shifted imperceptibly from one of bitter reproach to a burgeoning sense of reconciliation. The relatives, who once exchanged whispered criticisms and exchanged severe glances, now found themselves pausing in their judgments. A heavy silence, a shared, soul-stirring pause, settled, inviting each person to look deep inside themselves. The words of the letters, imbued with Claire's gentle wisdom and radiant sincerity, began to soften even the hardest hearts. Michael, witnessing the slow but profound transformation, stepped forward again. With a voice quivering but resolute, he added, "Claire asked that each of you remember that life is far too short to be spent in the prison of prejudice. She believed that every moment of joy is earned by courage, and that courage means choosing love, even when it defies expectations." He extended his hands toward the assembled family, and in an act of tender finality, placed a small hand-crafted token in each person's grasp, a keepsake which bore a miniature engraving of a heart intertwined with an olive branch. "These are my final gifts from Claire. Let them remind you daily that love is the legacy we must all nurture," he said softly. An emotional crescendo built as the family members, now visibly shaken and tearful, began to embrace one another. Whispers of apologies and confessions of regret mingled with promises to change old ways of thinking. In that room, every long-held assumption was questioned, and every cold barrier was slowly dismantled by the gentle power of Claire's words and Michael's selfless goodbye. Outside, as the storm clouds that had gathered earlier finally began to break apart to reveal a fragile moonlit sky, the family ventured into the garden once more. They approached the new sapling Michael had planted beneath the revered oak, each step heavy with both grief and an unspoken hope. With teary eyes and trembling voices, they circled the tree. It had instantly become a powerful symbol, a beacon of renewal, growth, and the promise that love, when nurtured with openness and humility, could indeed overcome even the most deep-seated prejudices. As the night deepened, the family shared quiet words of remembrance and resolve. In a final cathartic moment, Michael clasped the hands of a few of the relatives close to him, whispering gentle farewells and assurances that Claire's spirit would forever live on in their newfound commitment to embrace one another without judgment. Though the pain of her loss remained, it was now intermingled with a sincere desire to honor her memory by building bridges of compassion and understanding. Under a sky brushed with the soft hues of early dawn, the family slowly gathered outside the time-worn walls of the ancestral home. The once tense atmosphere, thick with lingering shock and bitter memories, had begun to give way to a fragile hope, a promise that something new could grow from the remnants of old pain. The garden, a place Claire had cherished above all else, lay before them like a sanctuary. Night's hushed drizzle had left the petals of the roses, and the dew on the grass sparkling as though lit from within. It was in that tender, natural light that the true reconciliation was set to begin. Michael, standing at the garden's edge, surveyed the scene with eyes that carried both sorrow and a steely determination. With the small sapling he had planted earlier still sheltering tender shoots of life, he now moved further into the garden, the very heart of this living memory, to invite each family member into the circle of renewal. His steps were unhurried and purposeful, drawing the scattered relatives toward the ancient oak that had long been a silent sentinel in these grounds. Its gnarled branches, heavy with the wisdom of countless seasons, seemed to beckon them to remember that nature too had the power to forgive, to mend, and to bloom again. As they all assembled near the oak, the air was alive with a quiet expectation. Hesitant, tear-streaked faces, once marred by whispered accusations and rigid prejudices, now looked with cautious wonder toward the man who had, in the face of so much judgment, stood resolute in his love for Claire. Michael's presence, once a source of painful scandal, now radiated compassion and steadfast integrity. He cleared his throat softly and began, not with a declaration of what had been hidden, but with an invitation to embrace what could be healed. Today, in this sacred space that Claire loved so dearly, I ask you to join me in a gesture of rebirth, he said, his deep voice resonating through the cool morning air. Let this tree be more than just a living remembrance of her beauty. It is a symbol of a new beginning, one where we set aside old prejudices and honor the truth of her heart. Each leaf, each branch will remind us that love can flourish when we nurture it with acceptance, understanding, and most importantly, courage. One by one, reluctant yet hopeful, the family members stepped forward. An elderly aunt, whose face had been etched with years of staunch tradition, reached out and gently traced her fingers along the rough bark of the oak. A cousin, eyes brimming with tears, not solely for the loss of Claire, but for what she now realized she had missed, wrapped an arm around another relative and whispered an apology for past harsh words. As soft-spoken murmurs of regret transformed into genuine expressions of empathy, the garden itself seemed to exhale a gentle sigh carried by the rustling leaves, as though nature was welcoming this rare moment of healing. In that serene tableau, Michael carefully retrieved a small envelope from his jacket pocket. The final letter Claire had written to him, entrusted with her last wish. With a trembling hand and a voice filled with emotion, he read aloud her heartfelt instructions. I leave this world with a single plea. Let love conquer all fear. May you, my cherished ones, find in every moment the strength to release your burdens of prejudice and embrace the beauty of our shared humanity. The path ahead will not be free of sorrow, but it is one that I hope will lead to unity, forgiveness, and a rebirth of the heart. I entrust you with the legacy of our love, to see it as a guide, a light, and a promise that life, despite its trials, is worth the boundless, transformative power of love. The sincerity in Claire's words enveloped the gathered family like a warm embrace. Her voice, resonating from the tender script on the paper, seemed to speak directly into the hearts of those who had once clung so tightly to narrow-minded traditions. For many, it was as if a veil had been lifted. Suddenly, the rigid lines of bias softened into the recognition that in every human soul there flickered an undeniable desire for connection and acceptance. The dam of decades-old resentment began to crumble, replaced by tears of recognition and the stirring of a new understanding. With Claire's final words still echoing in the air, Michael then knelt beside the sapling. Slowly, he pressed a small engraved medallion into the soft soil at its base. The medallion bore a simple yet profound inscription, "Love always." As he did so, he raised his eyes to meet those of his late wife's family. In that silent moment, a profound truth emerged from the blending of grief and hope. Though Claire had lived a life divided by fear and secrecy, her choices had sown the seeds for a future where love could finally reign free. One by one, the family encircled the sapling and the mighty oak. Gentle apologies turned to embraces. Tears were shed, not out of lingering bitterness, but in tribute to a life that had dared to be different. A soft murmur of "I'm sorry and I forgive you" began to ripple among them, a fragile symphony of reconciliation that promised to dissolve old wounds and clear the path for healing. Among them, even the hardest hearts started to beat in a rhythm unburdened by old prejudices, a rhythm that acknowledged the transformative power of vulnerability, understanding, and forgiveness. In the midst of this emerging rebirth, Michael stepped back, allowing the silence to speak. His heart, heavy with the loss of the woman he had loved so desperately and yet so quietly, now soared with the possibility of a brighter, more inclusive future, a future where the legacy of Claire's courage would live on in the unity of her family. The garden, alive with the scent of wet earth and new growth, symbolized an enduring promise that every end is but a precursor to a new beginning, and that love, when nurtured by compassion, can bridge the deepest divides. As the first rays of the sun broke free from the gentle embrace of morning, the family, reshaped by the experience and enriched by the revelation of Claire's true heart, lingered in quiet reflection. Outside, the garden whispered softly in the breeze, a hymn of renewal and hope for hearts that had been forever changed. The path toward healing had begun. And in that moment, beneath the ancient oak and beside a tender sapling, every soul present understood that the true measure of a legacy was not found in adherence to tradition, but in the courage to love boldly, without reservation or fear. In the weeks that followed, the soulful gathering in the garden, the once fractured family slowly began to stitch together the remnants of their shattered perceptions. With the tender whispers of Claire's confession still echoing in their hearts, they arranged a memorial service, a final unifying celebration of her life, her secret love, and the transformative power of acceptance. The service was to be held in the garden, beneath the ancient oak that had quietly witnessed generations of both joy and sorrow, and beside the sapling that Michael had so reverently planted. This was not a farewell solely to a beloved daughter and wife, but also a turning point for a family long held captive by inherited prejudice. As the day of the memorial arrived, a luminescent mist blanketed the garden. The dewy grass sparkled in the gentle light of a shy sunrise. Relatives, once divided by anger and denial, slowly filtered into the garden. Their faces, once hardened by shock and suspicion, now bore expressions of quiet contemplation. The air was filled with an almost tangible sense of hope, as if the very earth beneath their feet, enriched by past regrets and new possibilities, was promising a fresh start. At the center of the gathering, Michael stood before a modest wooden podium draped with a delicate garland, his eyes moist with unspoken grief, and a steadfast love that had withstood years of hiding, scanned the faces that now looked back at him with tentative empathy. His voice, steady and resolute, broke the soft hush that had fallen over the assembly. Today we honor Claire, the woman whose heart held a love so deep and defiant that it could transform even the darkest corners of tradition. Her story is not simply one of secrets and sacrifice, but of a courageous choice to live a life driven by love rather than fear. In her memory, let us choose to see one another with clearer eyes, to embrace differences, and to build a legacy that celebrates kindness above all else. One by one, members of the family approached the oak tree and the sapling. An elderly uncle, whose furrowed brow had once been emblematic of unyielding adherence to the old ways, laid a trembling hand on the oak's rough bark and whispered, "I'm sorry, Claire. I see now that my fear cost me the chance to truly know you." Others, including cousins, aunts, and even those who had spoken out in anger at Claire's hidden life, offered words of apology and promises to reconsider their long-held beliefs. In a symbolic gesture of unity, several family members tied strips of fabric, each inscribed with a word of hope like forgiveness, acceptance, and love, around the trunk of the oak. These colorful ribbons danced in the early breeze, creating a vibrant tapestry that wove together the disparate threads of their histories. In a particularly moving moment, Michael stepped forward again. With quiet determination, he produced a weathered leather-bound journal, one of many Claire had kept throughout her years of clandestine love. Opening it to a page marked with a pressed wildflower, he read aloud a passage written in her soft, careful script. "My dearest family, I did not live in the shadow of fear because I fancied rebellion, but because I believed that true love must be nurtured against all odds. I entrust you with my heart, not to sever bonds, but to mend them, if you would dare to embrace what is real rather than what is expected. Let this diary be a testament to the triumph of love, and may you find the courage to forgive and begin anew." The words hung heavily in the cool air, infusing every heart with a profound mix of sorrow and possibility. Eyes glistened in the gathered crowd, some brimming with tears of regret, others glistening with budding hope. For the first time in generations, The family began to see that Claire's true legacy was not one of scandal or defiance, but rather of transformative compassion, a love that transcended societal conventions and healed deeply ingrained wounds. As the ceremony neared its close, the family, now united in purpose, joined Michael in a final act of remembrance. In a slow, deliberate procession, they circled the sapling one last time. At its base, Michael, standing with the reverence of a guardian of lost dreams, gently pressed his palm against the soft earth. One by one, each family member came forward to do the same, their hands leaving transient imprints in the damp soil, a collective pledge that the pain of the past would be replaced by a future built on forgiveness and love. At that moment, beneath the slowly brightening sky, the garden seemed to come alive with a quiet affirmation of renewal. The ancient oak, steadfast and eternal, bore witness to a union of hearts that dared to challenge old barriers. The newly planted sapling, though fragile, whispered of endless possibility. Every tear shed on that cool morning was transformed into a silent vow, a promise to honor Claire's memory, not with judgment or isolation, but with an open heart and a commitment to reshape their future. As the family dispersed into the soft embrace of the day, Michael lingered for a final moment. With a look that was at once both sorrowful and hopeful, he turned his gaze toward the horizon. The sunrise heralded not just the end of a long, painful night, but the beginning of a dawn imbued with the promise of unity and love. In that quiet, resolute moment, he understood that although Claire's physical presence was gone, her spirit, the immortal legacy of love she had forged, would forever remain the guiding light for all who dared to choose compassion over convention. Subscribe if you believe that in every act of forgiveness lies the chance for a new beginning, and that the legacy of true love is measured not by adherence to tradition, but by the courageous hope that unites hearts and transforms lives.